Back when I was in high school, I remember that my friends and I found this secret room inside of the school. The room wasn't actually hidden or anything, but it was a classroom that was no longer used. Now it was vacant and just stored a bunch of random stuff in it. You see, the school that I went to was pretty old, but it had been renovated several times. This caused the overall layout to be somewhat strange, and this classroom was in the corner of a normally quiet hallway. It was not in an area that would normally get a lot of foot traffic. My friend Michael was the one that originally found it. I'm not sure how, but I guess he must have just been curious and tried opening the door. Apparently the lock on the door didn't work, so it would just open. So Michael, me, and two other friends are the ones who knew about it. We had a bit of a friend group, and we went in, and it was interesting to see all the stuff in there. It had some things from over 10 years ago, such as old assignments from various teachers and old equipment. There were box TVs that were on those stands with wheels, and old whiteboards as well. The room also had desks scattered about, and tons of books. It was quite cluttered, and had carpeted floors as well. So my friends and I would occasionally go into the room and hang out before school, between classes, during lunch, or other random times. It was just our secret hangout spot for the friend group. We were certain that nobody knew we were in there, and we made sure that nobody was looking whenever we went in, which was pretty easy. So one day, in between classes, I went there with 3 other friends. It was right before our last class of the day. Michael had told us to meet there in our friend group chat. He wanted to talk about some plans to hang out and play basketball over the weekend. So I remember that everybody left to go to their classes, except for me and Michael, because we had a class together and it was really close by. We were still sitting at desks and talking when we heard this sound come over the school intercom. It was strange because I didn't know what it was about, but shortly after, we heard this announcement that the school was being locked down. In my time in high school to that point, we had never had a lockdown before. I didn't really know what the reason for it was, but I was a little bit nervous. Obviously, in a lockdown, you're supposed to go to the nearest classroom and nobody's allowed to be in the hallways. Michael and I thought about walking to our classroom, but then decided to just stay in the room that we were in. I mean, we were in a classroom after all, and nobody probably even knew that we were here. There had been lockdown drills at the school before, so we knew the basics of what you're supposed to do. Turn the lights out in the classroom and lock the door. There was a cover already over the small window in the door to this classroom, so whether the light was on or off, you really couldn't tell from the hallway. So we left it on, and then I went to try to lock the door. However, I remembered that the lock on the door seemed to be broken. I mean, that's how we were able to get in the room in the first place. We figured that that wasn't a big deal though. So Michael and I just sat in random desks in the room, talked and went on our phones, and waited for the lockdown to be over. Neither of us had any idea as to what it was for. Other than us, things were very quiet. We texted some friends trying to figure out what was happening, but nobody seemed to know. Then, I would say about 15 minutes into the lockdown, we heard footsteps approaching in the hallway. I was sitting not too far away from the door, so I quickly got up and turned the light off, just in case it was visible at all from the outside. The footsteps continued to get closer, and Michael and I got really concerned. We probably weren't supposed to be in here in the first place, so whoever this was, if they came into the room, we had to hide. Very quickly, we decided to just find a hiding place. Now, there was so much junk in the room that it really wasn't too hard to find a hiding spot. Michael and I took about 10 seconds to get in our places. He went in the far corner of the room behind a cabinet, and I hid on the ground to the side of the desk. The classroom was also very dark, so it would not be obvious where we were. Then, just moments after hiding, the footsteps reached right outside of the door. The doorknob turned and the door opened. Then we heard somebody entering. I looked up from where I was. I saw this man walk in, but I couldn't really tell what he looked like because of how dark it was. I was confident that he couldn't see me though. When the guy got inside of the room, he closed the door quietly, then stood just inside of the entrance. After a few seconds, he took a few steps into the room. Michael and I were both trying to be as quiet as we possibly could. I literally held my breath for a while before breathing as quietly as possible. The man was just standing around a few feet inside the room for a while. This went on for maybe 5 minutes. I wasn't sure who this guy was, if he worked for the school, or if he was possibly the cause of the lockdown. He didn't really seem like a teacher, and I didn't know why he would enter this room, so I was starting to think that it was the latter. Then, out of nowhere, Michael made a sound. I think that he just moved slightly. I'm not sure why, but you could just barely hear it because of how quiet it was. When this happened, I heard the man in the room suddenly move a little bit. Then he spoke. The guy said, "What was that? Is somebody in here?" My heart started beating like crazy, but I didn't move or make a sound. Michael did the same. After a few moments of silence, the man called out again, asking who was there. He sounded aggravated and even kind of nervous. Then he shouted, asking if anybody was inside of the room. Michael and I did not make a peep. Then we heard the man quickly walk to the doorway, and the door opened up seconds later. Then the man left. I let out a huge sigh of relief, and I'm sure that Michael did the same. We stayed in our hiding places for a while though, just in case the man were to come back. Probably about 20 minutes later, there was an announcement that the lockdown was over. We felt much better. We then left the classroom and went to our final class of the day. Later, after school, we were able to find out that the lockdown was caused by a suspicious man inside of the school. Based on what I heard, I'm 100% certain that the man that entered the classroom we were in was the same guy. He must have been trying to find a place to hide, and we were already in there. Apparently, Michael must have scared him off. I'm really glad that the guy didn't try to find us or anything, and just left. This happened when I was in high school. It was my sophomore year, and this was during the first semester. I remember that I was sitting in my history class, and we were just watching a documentary. That's what we did most of the time in that class. So right in the middle of it, the door to the classroom opened, and this random student walked in. She said my name, and she was holding what appeared to be a pass in her hand. So I got up from my desk and walked over to her. When I took the pass from her, it was for me to go to the library. I was confused at first because I was not aware of why I had to go to the library, and I had not been expecting to get any kind of pass at all that day. I showed the pass to my teacher, and then he said that I could go. So I left the classroom and headed out into the hallway. Now, class was about halfway over at this point. The library was basically on the complete other end of the school and was usually very quiet. So I remember walking there, and maybe 2 or 3 minutes in, I heard over the school speakers that we were having a lockdown. Right when I heard this, I wasn't sure what to do. I could try to go to the library, or I could try to go back to my history classroom. It would be a couple of minutes either way. I decided to go to the library. But as I was walking, maybe 30 seconds later, I saw a classroom and I knew that one of my friends was in that class. It was also a teacher that I had later on in the day. So I had the idea to stop and go to that classroom. When I went to the door, I knocked on it, and the teacher was very quick to open the door and let me in. Then I joined that class in huddling towards the back corner of the room. The lights were off, and things were really quiet for the most part. There was a little bit of whispering, and nobody seemed to know what the lockdown was about. However, about 15 minutes later, there was another knock on the classroom door. I think most of us in the room got nervous when we heard it. The teacher went to the door, and soon opened it up. I heard the voice of our vice principal. Then I heard my name get called. I was very surprised and confused. I got up and walked over to the teacher and vice principal, and she told me that I was not in trouble, but I had to go to the office. Now, at this point, even though I was told I wasn't in trouble, I was nervous. We went back to the offices where the principal was and stuff. Then, a very short time later, the lockdown was ended. When I went into the office, I was told some shocking news. Apparently, there was a man inside of the school who didn't work there, and he was the reasoning for the lockdown. But also, the pass that I got from the library was not real. The man somehow walked right into the school and was wearing somewhat professional clothing. I guess that he blended in, and most people must have just assumed that he was a sub or something. He found a kid walking down the hallway who was a teacher's aide, and asked her to deliver the pass to me. He had handwritten the note himself for me to go to the library. After the kid delivered it, the man was waiting around the library for me. What his intentions were, I don't know. I was told about this and asked a bunch of other questions. Eventually, after almost an hour, I was picked up by my mother and brought home. The man had been caught by police after they found him near the library. I had never seen him before, and I had no idea what he was doing. But apparently, He must have seen me if he knew my name and stuff. It still gives me the creeps to think about. I remember back in my junior year of high school, we went on a field trip for one of my classes. This was a field trip that took up 2 entire school days. We had gone to an amusement park for a science class, which was a lot of fun. I also missed a test for another one of my classes, but luckily my teacher was cool and let me make it up. So we scheduled a time after school the next day for me to make up the test. It was for Spanish class, and the classroom was towards the end of one hallway on the north side of the building. When I got out of school, I walked over to the Spanish classrooms. My teacher, Mr. Jordan, was in the classroom, and a couple of other students were there as well. I'm not sure what exactly the other students were doing there. I think they might have been making up an assignment or something like that. Mr. Jordan handed me the test when I got there, and he told me that I could take the test in another room. He said the students were going to be talking to him in his classroom, and he didn't want them to distract me. So he had gotten a key to a nearby Spanish classroom of Mrs. Aceves, and said that I could take the test there. So we walked over to the classroom of Mrs. Aceves, and she was already gone for the day. Mr. Jordan told me that he would be in his room if I needed anything. Then he told me good luck and left. I sat down at a random desk and then started the exam. Spanish was a class that I was decent at, but I wasn't expecting to ace the test or anything. However, as I went on with it, things were going really well. I was feeling confident about my answers, until when I was almost done, I heard suddenly the school was having a lockdown. Of course, this was strange, partly because it was after school hours. I didn't know that schools had lockdowns when school wasn't in session, but I guess it makes sense. So anyways, I didn't really know what to do. I could stay there in Mrs. Aceves' classroom, or I could try to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, which was just around the corner. After debating it for a moment or two, I decided to go back to Mr. Jordan's room, so I got up and left the classroom. Mr. Jordan's room was literally right around the corner, like 50 feet away. There was only one classroom separating the two. So after I got out into the hallway, I walked over to Mr. Jordan's room. When I got there, I tried opening the door, but it was locked. I was expecting him to come over and open up the door, but literally right after I tried opening it, I heard a noise behind me. It was footsteps, and somebody was walking from around the corner past Mrs. Aceves' room. It was some random woman who was clearly not a student or a teacher. She had really messed up hair, and I just knew right then that this lockdown must have been caused by her. The woman started just walking towards me. Without any more time to wait for Mr. Jordan, I started walking away farther up the hallway. When I did, I saw the woman start to walk after me. She was really creeping me out, and I had no idea what she was doing here. As I walked through the hallway, it was completely silent and nobody else was around. I started walking faster, but could hear the woman still behind me. I turned and went into another hallway, and the woman followed. I was continuing to walk faster and faster, and the woman was doing the same. I didn't want to know what would happen if she caught up with me, so I kept going down one hallway after another. The woman was keeping up with me no matter what I did. I didn't want to risk stopping and trying to go to a classroom because I didn't know which teachers were still at school, and basically all the doors were closed as well. So I kept going. Soon, I made it all the way to the front end of the school. I saw the front doors and I went for them. When I made it outside of the school, the woman did not leave after me, and she stayed inside. After that, I just ran for my car and went home. I learned later on that the woman was in fact the cause of the lockdown. I'm not sure what she did, but the police were called for her and the school was locked down. Except the police showed up at the entrance that the woman was seen by, which was not the main entrance that I left out of. I guess Mr. Jordan was literally walking to the door to unlock it when I walked away. He let me finish the test the following day after school, and I'm really glad that the woman never caught up with me. I'm currently a high school gym teacher. This is something that happened just last school year. One day, I was preparing for a class that I was about to teach. In the class, we were going to be using the high school gymnasium and doing some activities. For this, I needed to get some equipment such as the orange cones and whatnot. But the school is kind of old, and the storage room for the equipment for some reason is not really that close to the gym. Instead, I have to walk down this really long hallway that's nearby, and there are a few storage rooms towards the end of it. So on this day, I left the gym and walked down this long hallway to the storage room. When I opened up the door, it was mostly dark inside of it. Now, these storage rooms are very cluttered. Things are not organized the best, and there are several shelves and other things in there, so it's kind of big. After getting inside, it was very dark. I didn't even bother to turn the light on though, because I knew exactly what I needed and where it was. However, after taking a couple of steps inside, suddenly I heard a noise. The next thing I knew, one of the equipment shelves was falling over, right on top of me. After landing on me, basically everything fell off the shelf. I was fine, but I was knocked down and covered in random stuff. It all happened so fast, but I knew that somebody was in here and had pushed over that shelf. It was not something that would just fall over on its own. I pushed the junk off of me and looked around. I heard somebody moving away, but didn't see who was in there. I got up to my feet and was about to go back out of the room into the hallway, but when I did, I heard another voice and turned and just barely saw what looked like a man. He moved out of view really quickly, and then he started to push over another shelf. I was able to get out of the room just before the other shelf came crashing down. When I left, I heard the guy going to leave as well. As I was walking away, I saw the door open and just barely saw this guy coming out of the room. I knew that he didn't work at the school. This was also no student. I then sprinted down the hall and ran back into the gym. When I got there, I took out my phone and reported the incident. The police were called, and the school was put into a lockdown. For the lockdown, I went to an otherwise vacant classroom that was really close to the gym. This classroom did not belong to any teacher in particular, and was used for gym classes as well as sports teams. So when I went inside there, I was all by myself, and I locked the door. As I was inside, maybe 5 minutes later, there was a banging on the door. I had a bad feeling about it. I walked over and removed the window cover to look and see who was there. I saw the same man. As soon as he saw me, he tried opening the locked door. Then he started banging on it again. It was like he was trying to break the door with how hard he was pounding on it. But luckily, the school's doors were very strong. I just went back over to my desk and reported where the guy was. I hoped that he would leave me alone, but I also wanted him to get caught. He continued to bang on the door for a good 2 or 3 minutes. Then the police arrived. They were able to get the man and leave the school with him. I'm not sure how he got in. He had been hiding in that storage room for a while though, possibly as long as a day. I still can't believe that he pushed the shelf over onto me, and I'm glad that I'm okay. Every time I go to those storage rooms though, I still get worried that somebody will be hiding in there. This happened back when I was in high school. It was during my senior year in the fall semester. I remember that I had study hall, and during this time I would often go to the library. We were allowed to, but I was one of the only students that did. Most of the other kids liked to stay in their classroom and work there. If I didn't have any homework, I would stay in the classroom myself. But when I was working on stuff, I'd go to the library because it was much easier to focus there. So one day, I was in the library doing homework during study hall. I was listening to music on my headphones, and I was able to finish my homework with a little bit of time left in class. I was going to leave the library early to go to my locker before the final class of the day. At my high school, the rules were not really that strict. You didn't even really need a pass to walk in the hallways during class periods. So I headed out from the library, I think about 3 or 4 minutes before class would be let out. I walked back to my locker, which took a few minutes. Then I put my books away and got the one for my final class. Then I stood around at my locker and looked at the time. Class was out by now, but I was not seeing any students in the hallways. This made me a bit confused. Now I took my headphones out, which had been in the entire time playing music. Things were completely silent. I was really confused, so I just walked to my next classroom. But when I got there, the door was locked. At this point, I still didn't think of a lockdown. I started heading back to my locker, thinking of what could possibly be going on. I hadn't heard the lockdown announcement because I had my headphones in. When I made it back to my locker and saw that the halls were still empty, I checked my watch and phone for the time. My times were not off, and I matched them with the school clock. I just didn't understand where everybody was. Then, I finally realized that there must be a lockdown going on. At first, I was thinking and hoping that maybe it was a drill. So I started to go to my classroom again and was going to knock on the door. My teacher would then be able to let me in. I had to go down a couple of hallways to get there. When I went down one, I passed by a staircase, and I heard multiple people walking down. After I passed it, I looked back, and I saw these 3 men going down the stairs. Each of the 3 guys were wearing all black clothing and ski masks. Instantly, I had a bad feeling about it. I kept walking and then quickly went around a corner. But when I did, I looked back for a moment and saw the 3 guys looking in my direction and starting to walk towards me. They were a long ways back, but this was still terrifying. At this point, I could only assume that the school was locked down because of them. I quickly went around the corner and just hoped that the guys wouldn't follow me. But as I made it to the end of that hallway, I looked back. I thought for a moment that I was good, but then I noticed all 3 of the men walking around the corner and coming towards me. I was terrified. I started walking extremely fast to the end of the hallway that I was in. When I made it towards the end though, I recognized a classroom. It was one of a teacher that I had previously had who I knew pretty well. It was a risk to stop, but I decided to. I started knocking on the door extremely fast. I also called out the teacher's name. For a few seconds, there was nothing. I tried the door, but of course, it was locked. I turned and saw the men coming around this corner too. They looked right at me. For a moment, I was about to turn and run, but then the door opened. I quickly went inside and then shut the door and locked it behind me. The men did not try entering the room or knock on the door, so they must have passed by. But I'm still confident that the guys were going after me until I got in the classroom. The lockdown continued for a while after that. I told the teacher about the guys, and she called it in to somebody. Eventually, after like 30 more minutes, the lockdown finally ended. The 3 men left the school, but were tracked down a ways away. I really never learned much more about it than that. I just know that it was one of the scariest moments of my life when I saw those guys in the hallway. I'm really glad that everybody was okay.